All right, welcome everyone. How's everybody doing today? Dr. Horacio Maldonado. And today I have a very special guest in our channel, All Things Leadership. I have Darren McPherson. He is the founder of the Wardroom-to-Boardroom, an elite coaching service, helping veterans transition into the corporate world. Also, I had the privilege of working under his leadership when he was my weapons officer on board Warship 80. Thank you, Darren, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Horatio, and for that kind introduction. And yeah, it's great to see you. And it's been a while since we've seen each other in person, but I think we were both younger and better looking in those days. But it's great to see you, and congratulations on all that you've accomplished since the long time ago that we served together on USS Roosevelt.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Darren. I really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. And I know yeah, I've been talking before, even when I was working on my doctorate, just like a little bit of context. I reached out to you to talk about, just picking your brain a little bit of what we do and stuff. So today, you know what, we're gonna, you being a trainer in a coaching service, that helps the veterans from, especially more to the corporate world. I know it's not your average standard, yet it's just transition from point A to point B. So let me start by saying this. You created the Wardroom to Boardroom. How has your experiences as a Navy captain, retired, shaped the way you coach veterans into the corporate roles that exist today?
Yeah, and to answer that question, I think really it might be a good to go over a bit of my history and how I got here. So if you'll indulge me a little bit,
Yeah, definitely.
I made a decision very early in my Navy career that when I retired, I did not want to go into the defense industry as a civilian, and that's okay. A lot of people do that. A lot of senior officers do that. Retired folks do that. I did not. Uh, I decided I wanted to go in the civilian realm. And so once I did decide to retire from the Navy, it was rather uncertain. And I know that feeling. You don't know what you don't know. There's a sense of standing on the outside, and there's all these doors that are open or that are presented to you that you could take. But it's a matter of picking the right door and getting inside. That is the challenge that veterans face. And veterans typically have a good deal of confidence. We've all navigated challenging military career, done some very challenging things, and so the confidence is typically there, but there's this unknown of how you will fit into the civilian world that I know I certainly felt, and I think a lot of others do as well. So my particular transition was intensive. I dove into preparation as if it were my next job, and that's what I would recommend anybody who is approaching from a transition from the military to the civilian world. Your job search is your job.
Mhm.
And so I had a number of retired military who helped me make that leap from being in the service in the Navy to the civilian world. I had a couple, one of my former bosses when I was uh, in command of a guided missile destroyer. He helped me and talked to me through a lot of how that transition should take place. I had another officer that I served with, a former Navy SEAL. He was already on the outside. He coached me through a lot and gave me a lot of good ideas. There's some different organizations that I worked with as well. So it's a process and it's not necessarily intuitive, especially if you've never really had a professional job outside of the military.
Mhm.
Um, I was fortunate that I had three job offers all within about 30 minutes. And that doesn't mean that I was so good. It's just they all kind of coincided. It took about 6 months to get there. And I wasn't sure which one I should take. And there was no real epiphany. But I ended up choosing the one that I thought was going to be the best culture fit. Ironically, I'm not sure it was the right culture fit, but I think it was where God wanted me to be and where I was supposed to be. So I think it worked out. So I highlight that because it's just you never quite know what you think and then what is reality. Once I was safely in the corporate world, I started getting lots of calls from military friends and acquaintances of like, "Hey, how did you do this?" So, uh, like people did for me, I wanted to help. I wanted to take people through that process, through my journey, and hopefully help them out. I probably talked to at least 30 people, personnel who were doing that transition. And now that I'm retired from Shell and the corporate world for now, I wanted to continue to contribute and help those that I had been helping previously and formalize it a little bit. So I founded Wardroom-to-Boardroom. It was a natural progression for me
Yeah.
from the time I was a junior officer, as you may recall, hopefully, that I enjoy coaching and working with people to maximize their performance and ultimate potential. So it was a natural extension of that.
Yeah. You talk about maximizing the mentorship and the training that we do when I was in the military. During my research, I talked to a lot of senior officers, pretty much in operations service, and just talking to them about how the transition was and the horror stories, man. It kind of brings a reality to it. I think you even mentioned it right now, and I appreciate you saying that you kind of separate what I believe it is and what it really is in the private sector. And that what is the different views based? Well, I was a colonel, I was an admiral, I was and E4, I was at E2, and the transition pyramid or the escalation where it goes from how I'm gonna get a job, it's really not the same. I wish it was a linear way, but it actually wasn't. So I think there's a lot of uh, challenges, and I'll be honest with you, I know that when I was sharing a lot of my information to some of these agencies, I was being very specific and like something is what I want to do when I get out in this role, in this position. This is what I've done for the past 20 plus years, but that's not the reality of it. The best I interviewed this Army colonel, man, and he said it perfectly. This guy was like, he goes, well, just because I was an Army colonel doesn't mean that I'm going to get a nice, cushy six-figure salary. He goes, I didn't. I went down like 50 grand less what I was making, but he progressed, as he went on. And I know you just mentioned it too. Do you believe that, you know, officers well, anybody that has served, especially in the wardroom, for more than 20 years, do you think it's more challenging for them to um, find that job that they're really seeking for, or is it more like I'm just gonna get what I get?
No, I think that is the conundrum that we face. And I mentioned, kind of that metaphor of standing outside looking in, and you have doors, you have opportunities. And I should say it's not just senior officers, it's enlisted, it's senior enlisted, it's people, anybody who's served in the military bring a certain level of skills and experience and ability to focus and be disciplined. And that's what the civilian corporate world and will expect from you. But I think what you alluded to is important in that we have to figure out where we want to go and where we want to be. And when you've never done it before, if you spent your entire professional career in the military, you don't really know what that is. You have an idea, like, oh, I have an idea of what I want to do and where I want to be. And I always tell people it's very similar to when you're talking to a detailer. A detailer in the
Yeah,
Navy is somebody who kind of picks your next job. Is they'll ask you, okay, fill out your dream sheet. How much money do you want to make? Where
yeah,
do you want to be? Location. And then, what kind of job do you want? So those three criteria is a good starting point. And it's very similar in the civilian world. Compensation, um, job, and then a location. So if you can iron out that and figure out that, then that's a good start. The reality is, though, then you get into the job, and what I've found is that a lot of military who transition, their first job is not their forever job. Their
yeah,
first job
mm,
post-military. It's oftentimes the second job. Why? Because they don't necessarily get it right. They're looking throughout, and they're so eager, like you said. I just want to get a job, and I'm worried about income. I'm worried about when I get out that I can pay the bills and support my family. So oftentimes they'll take the job just because it's there, not
yeah,
because it's a right fit. So I think that is something that as military members, we have to balance between, okay, do I take this job because it's the first one I was offered and it's a respectable salary? Or do I hold out for something that I think might be a better fit or more compensation or the right
mhm,
location? There's no right or wrong answer to that. It's
yeah,
really what that individual feels that is the best fit. But know that there's no guarantee that you're going to get it right coming out of the gate.
No, I wish it was, and we even went. I mean, it's always a struggle. So, staying on on the mindset perspective, I wrote this down. What are some of the mindset shifts that you see veterans struggle when then moving from the military command structure, what they're normally accustomed to a more fluid dynamic of the corporate leadership side?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And probably the biggest difference I see is clarity. And in the military, at least in good commands, there's clarity in the objective, there's goals, there's missions, the plan of the day in the Navy.
Yeah.
Even though you may not always follow the plan of the day, it's a baseline. There's a
It's a
clear
baseline,
chain
yeah.
of command, regulations, procedures, lessons learned, history that drives one's behavior and performance. In many ways, this is good. It provides predictability and a foundation and framework for us to operate in the military. However, in some ways, it might be less beneficial as it may diminish creativity and innovation. And these are well-known differences between the military and civilian world. So it's not like that I'm identifying anything that people haven't seen before. But I think
Okay.
sometimes we struggle as veterans in the corporate world to a surprising degree because the dichotomy that exists between our day-to-day lives between these two worlds. In the corporate world, going back to where I started, much less clarity.
Yeah.
And it may be counterintuitive because there are many days in the military where we did not follow the plan and ended up doing something completely different than what we thought we were going to do. But the fundamentals in the military, the standard operating procedures were still there.
Yeah.
In the civilian world, not so much. There's
No.
no real lessons learned. There's
Yeah.
history, but you may not necessarily follow that history. There's no real regulations. There's maybe policies, but the policies in the civilian world are often not very well known. There's
Yeah.
no real standard procedures, is what I've found. And probably the biggest difference is communication is often much less direct than what we're used to in the military. It's more nuanced, and oftentimes it's completely lacking. There's a
Yeah.
stereotype, a reputation in the corporate world of silos, communication silos. And that stereotype and that reputation is there for a reason. It exists and it exists in spades.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is risk. In the military, we are used to dealing with risk. Risk to balance the mission, to keep people safe, equipment operating, and we have to identify and operate in risk, and it's part of our daily lives. In the civilian world, taking risk is rarely rewarded. And frankly, it's often punished. And I don't mean to say that in a negative way. Senior leadership knows that this is a problem, and they talk about failing fast. You may have heard that
Yeah.
before, or we have to not punish failure because of people trying to make things better, do a new product innovation or marketing, or doing something that maybe is a little bit outside of what the norm is in the corporate world. But the reality is in the corporate world that there is quarterly reporting and yearly targets. They're always going to be there.
Yeah.
And there is oftentimes not as much appetite to deal in risk as we are used to in the military.
Yeah.
So what this results in and how it manifests itself is often a middling approach, is that in the commercial world that there's nothing really revolutionary, nor is there a stagnation. It's just this kind of in-between approach where you have to operate on the periphery without real fundamental changes. So it takes some time for a military person to recognize and navigate this.
Hmm.
But ultimately, I'd say the biggest challenge in the military member who's made the transition to the corporate world is how to stay true to oneself, our successful ways of working, oftentimes our direct communication,
Yeah.
direct approach to problem solving, but yet deal in a new culture that operates in nuance and indirect communication.
Yeah.
That, I think, is the biggest challenge that we must face in the corporate world.
Yeah, definitely. And you made just some really good points, clarity and risk. I know that sometimes, well, with risk means, well, we're gonna spend a lot of money, and you're on a warship, but like we're just gonna assess the risk to make sure nobody, gets hurt. And we gotta just mitigating some of those risks. And I've seen that in my previous employments when I retired from the military. That risk is being seen completely different, but also the clarity from the perspective of you're on a ship or you're in a command, it's very structured, it's what we have. Here's like, yeah, we're just gonna let you know. What are you gonna let me know? My second job was, we're gonna let you know. No, when are you gonna let me know? Because I'm so structured in the way that when, of course, in the military, we had the POD, we had everything that was very structured. So, no, I'm with you. Do you
No,
believe in,
I think Horatio, it's a
yeah,
good point, and that a standard question that you're asked in a civilian job interview is, can you operate in an ambiguous environment and without a lot of supervision and guidance? And as a military member, you're like, of course, that is what we deal with,
that's what
chaos
we
every day. We're operating in a world of chaos in the military oftentimes, and without clear ways of doing things after the fundamentals have been established. But I think again that we don't recognize that we do have fundamentals. We do have that SOP. We do have baselines.
yeah.
Civilian world, they don't have that, and so you think that you're used to it and you'll be able to adjust in the civilian world, but it's really quite different.
Quite different. Yeah, no, I'm with you. You know, you were talking earlier about a lot of the things that, we're not doing, that we're normally accustomed to doing in the private sector, but not in the military. And it's a very difficult, I use the word loss of identity, and I've talked to a lot of senior officers. They're like, what do you mean I'm no longer a captain? You're no longer a captain, big guy. Just let today you're just Tom. Okay. And nobody stands in the coffee room when Tom comes in, but it's so ingrained in the tradition, I believe. I think it's a good thing, but it's also like a bad thing because you get used to it too. So how do you help the corporate leaders and the organizations better understand and harness the strengths that they bring for teaching service members into the boardroom now instead of the wardroom?
Yeah, I think my approach is really it's about helping the individual get recognized by corporate leaders, preparing them for the corporate
Mhm.
world's language, nuance, and enabling a path for entry and ultimately success. So I offer a five-step program. It's really tailored to the individual and it's personalized based on my experiences in the Navy, 30 years in the Navy and then 7 years in a corporate setting and in three different geographic regions. I started out in the Americas. Then I went to Asia Pacific as an expat, working in Vietnam, and then I ended up in Europe, and they call it EMEA, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So I was in three different regions and got to see quite a bit of how Shell and indeed the corporate world operates. My last role was integrating a new acquisition that Shell purchased in the United Kingdom and integrating them into Shell. So I got to see that a small to medium sized business and bringing that into Shell's ways of working. So what I offer is through that experience is a five-step program of essentially an introduction, setting the stage, getting to know the client, um, where their goals and interests are, how to network, how to market oneself, what the hiring process is going to look like for them, how to use resources and tools to their advantage, like headhunters or the interview process. What compensation should they be looking at? And then, give them some homework on resume and a dream
Yeah,
sheet that kind of talked about earlier. Um, that setting the stage kind of rolls into um, a success story, and then translating some success stories that I've seen into their individual transition and beyond. The third step is really about navigating that corporate culture once inside.
yeah,
Because again, once you're inside and you feel, okay, now I'm here, now it's about, okay, how do I fit into this culture? How do I fit into
exactly.
um, what they want and still retain and be true to myself and how I got to, where I am. That isn't always going to work exactly the way we would expect it to work
Yeah,
in the corporate world. I also do a resume review. I will tell you, I filled out many job applications and tailored the resumes to each one of those job applications. That's probably one of the biggest things I learned. And I still felt like I didn't quite have a good handle on it because I have 20 people read my resume and I think 19 of them said there's still too much military in it. Okay,
Hmm.
well, how do I take out or translate 30 years of my life into civilian speak? So I do have some experience on that now that I've spent 7 years in Shell and being a hiring manager and looked at, again, probably hundreds of resumes and CVs of applicants that were trying to come into our business. And so I look at that, and then finally I finish up with a mock interview. I feel that having done job interviews where I'm the hiring manager, dozens of those, and been on both sides now, that I have a pretty good idea of how to prepare for an interview, how to make one successful, and sell oneself during that hour that you might get. Sometimes the interview process, and if you go on long enough, you might have a half day or even a full day interview. I had several of those in companies that I interviewed with, but how to prepare yourself, how to sell yourself, and then how really to get inside of that door
Yeah.
uh, once you're kind of right there at the pinnacle.
Yeah, no, you know what, Darren? I like those steps, man. I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. I might even have to start using some of those. Um, on my last two resumes that I did, no CVs, I took off my military service, believe it or not, and they never asked me until like after the very end. They're like, "Oh, did you serve?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, yes, I did." Just because I think that I'm still doing some research on that, it could be a good thing or a bad thing. But I like the structure you have. I like the from the top to the bottom, gets to the very end, good in your interview. That really helps a lot of veterans. I think a lot of veterans, and I'm gonna stick to the officer community, just or the senior leadership, just because I think the perspective needs to be somewhat changed. I think you are probably the 87th or 90th senior officer that I've talked to since I retired, and it's much different, but it's still the same purpose. I think it's the same intention. It's just what do you want? And you said something that really piqued my interest right now is you want to find something that really makes you feel like, hey, you know what, I'm here now. Now, what am I supposed to fit? I know culture's being discussed a lot within the organizations. Within my organizational leadership perspective and realm, culture is one of the biggest things they ask me. Goes, well, I'll take a less paying salary job if the culture's up here. Yeah, you can pay me this much, but you know where it's going to be that even keel.
Yeah. Well,
So, yeah,
I agree. And I will tell you, I thought I could adjust to any culture. And because I had been in the military, I had 18 jobs in the military, 18 different roles. And you think, outside the military, you think, oh, it's kind of this monolithic culture inside the military. No, each command has a different culture. So you think, oh, I can adjust. Well, yes, you can adjust. And I was able to adjust inside of Shell, but I think I neglected the importance of culture in finding the right fit for me. And again, I don't know if I found the right fit at Shell. I think it's where I was supposed to be. But I will tell you, culture is incredibly important, not only for your professional competency and success, but also your peace of mind,
yeah,
because you can't overstate how much the culture impacts your happiness professionally and even personally when you go home at night, and whether or not you feel in a good place and where you're at professionally.
yeah. No, definitely, definitely. Darren, I'm gonna throw a curveball on you because I know you're good. You're a seasoned captain. Okay, so let me ask you this question. So, what is one guiding principle, leadership principle that Darren leans on, and that definitely is one that we talk about in your experiences as commanding officer, executive officer, department head, all those. What's the guiding principle that you live by?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'll give you several because they all kind of fit and they all kind of go together. Treat people with respect, be demanding, and don't ever ask people to do something you wouldn't do yourself. And I think that has kind of been my mantra since I was very young. I would never ask anybody to do something that I wouldn't do. And I consider that hard work.
Yeah.
So I would do that. I was very demanding, and I would like to think that it was people respected that because they knew that I wasn't asking them to do something that only, treat them poorly or that I wouldn't do myself. And then ultimately you treat people with respect. I'm not going to lie, I would get upset at times,
Hmm.
especially early in my career. But what I learned is you never get upset at the individual. It's about the situation,
Yeah.
and then you try to solve the situation. And frankly, I wouldn't. As I got older, I would have to almost get upset on purpose because you get older, you get a little bit more
Yeah.
laid back, and you figure out how to deal with people in a way that challenges them without being upset in the first place. So you have to figure out how to insert that passion, and I always say, passion, yes; emotion, no.
Yeah.
So I always wanted to be passionate about my work, emotional not,
Yeah.
because emotional leads to poor decisions or I think problems.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I was using the analogy that when you're emotional, you're not rational. So I always apply
Yeah.
that. Everything you're saying right now, Darren's like, this guy a chief, man? Because we stuck with the chief's mess, man, all the time. So, I like that. I really appreciate that, you saying that. So, Darren, thank you very much for your experience, your wisdom, your knowledge, everything you've done, what you're doing moving forward with the warden to boardroom perspective. I love it. Is anything that I can do. I really appreciate you taking the time today in our channel and just talking a little bit about your transition from an officer to the corporate, from the wardroom to the boardroom, which is important. So I really appreciate taking the time today.
Thank you, Dr. Horatio and former shipmate. Great to see you again, as always. And thanks again, and thank you for what you do. So um, happy
I,
to do this, and thanks again for the opportunity.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Well, everybody, thank you very much for joining us today in our All Things Leadership channel. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear anything for any interviews that have done in the past, dealing with leadership, transition, veterans, anything. Please subscribe and let us know. Everybody, have a good one.